There ought to be a law. The more numerous the laws, the more corrupt the government. That's a quote by Tacitus from the ancient Roman Empire. Have you ever been out in the world and someone did something that annoyed or inconvenienced you? If you're not a hermetic shut-in, I assume the answer is yes. Did you then think to yourself something like, there ought to be a law against, and then you fill in the blank with your annoyance du jour? Well, knock it off. Seriously. Stop and think about what you're really asking for when out of anger or frustration you invoke the government into your situation. Now, just to clarify, when I talk about laws in this sense, I'm talking about legislation passed by a city, state, province, or nation. I'm not talking about natural laws or laws of physics, which are completely different topics of discussion, but also very interesting. Now, when you're saying there ought to be a law, you're saying a lot more than you may realize. Consider what laws really are and what passing them and enforcing them require. I submit that when you say there ought to be a law, what you're really saying is, the government should solve this problem in the specific way that I want, using theft, taxes, and violence, enforcement, against me and my fellow citizens. Creating the law. Laws are passed, in theory, by some sort of legislative body in most countries in the world today. In the US, it's the Congress. In Great Britain, it's the Parliament. In reality, though, laws are usually written by multinational corporations, in the case of federal law, or by politically connected businesses, in the case of state and local laws. The multinational corporations with the federal laws, a good example is the Affordable Care Act, which was written behind closed doors by the pharmaceutical industry. When I'm talking about politically connected businesses at the state and local level, these are businesses that have favor with the mayor or the legislative body, and the purpose of them is to stifle competition so that they can enjoy capitalism without the competition, which is not really capitalism at all. But say that the laws really are passed by the legislative body, written and passed by the legislative body. This is also not a good situation because unless you're part of this body, you will have little, if any, input into what goes into the bill being voted on. Now, sure, you may have voted for your representative or senator, but a vote is not a contract. You can't take it back when your elected official behaves in a manner contrary to what he promised or you expected. Think about President Obama. He vowed to end the wars and close Guantanamo Bay. Here it is, the fifth year of his presidency, and not only are they not closing Guantanamo Bay, I just read an article about upgrading it with fiber optics. And also, the wars. Iraq, you can argue, but the U.S. is still in Afghanistan, and now we're also in Libya and Syria and a handful of other places. Just because you voted for Barack Obama or John McCain or Mitt Romney or even Ron Paul, it doesn't mean that what they promised when they got elected is what is really going to happen. Now, whether you have a voice in the creation of the law or not, you're still expected to submit and obey, no matter how unjust or unwise the law may be. Also, even if you fully support the spirit behind the law being passed, chances are that the legislators have packed it full of taxpayer-funded gifts in the form of pork to their financial backers, and or they've combined it with another bill that you do not personally support. In either way, you're still expected to submit and obey, again, no matter how unjust or unwise the law may be. Further, many laws that are passed at the state or federal level are very vague on purpose, by design. They're open to interpretation, and some of them don't even solve the problem being addressed. What they do is create a government agency to, quote, handle the perceived or real problem. And then the dictates of this created agency becomes the de facto law with little to no congressional oversight after the fact. So not only is it removed from the people, but it's also removed from the elected representatives. The public is then subject to the whims of a handful of these bureaucrats who may or may not have any expertise or even really competence in correcting the original problem that was being addressed. Just some examples from the headlines these days. You have a USDA wildlife specialist torturing animals, and you have the Environmental Protection Agency creating air pollution. Law enforcement. Now, after a law is passed, there's a whole other set of problems. A law that's passed has to be enforced, or it's not really a law at all. Well, who enforces the law? That's a really tough question to answer. Depending on the nature and jurisdiction of the law, it may be enforced by a number of different government agencies, whether it's the local police or the ATF or the FBI or the DEA or the FDA or the SEC or one of the many, many other alphabet soup government agencies that exist. Even the Department of Education is buying ammunition and weapons. It's ridiculous. Now, what happens when the interests of two agencies conflict? A famous example is the well-known and bitter rivalry between the CIA and FBI. They fight over the tax resources and over the jurisdiction and things of that nature. What happens? Who gets it? Now, what happens if someone within one of these agencies has a personal vendetta against a taxpayer? A lot of times in your local communities, a police officer might have a grudge against a farmer or businessman or whatever, and in a way to get him back, he can write him tickets. And they'll hold up in court. Sometimes they won't, but sometimes they will. Now, what if the government agency uses the power of the state to stalk someone? I've read many examples of police officers following home attractive women that they've pulled over, or they just wait and write down the address off of the driver's license and then show up at the house uninvited. I mean, that's a gross violation of these women's privacy. Now, ultimately, I'm not trying to pick on the people that work in these agencies, but the people that make up these organizations, at the end of the day, they're people too, and they're subject to the same faults and flaws to which we're all subject. Why should we willingly give these people authority to enforce edicts written by corrupt and sociopathic politicians? I mean, everyone knows at some level that politicians lie and steal and cheat, and we laugh about it and tell jokes. So to me, it's strange that we can admit this, and yet we hold in high regard the people that carry out the commands of these people that we know are corrupt. Okay, how do you pay for law enforcement? Well, it's taxes and fines. And to me, this is the most disturbing aspect of the legislative process, because we're actually forced to pay for what the government agencies do to us, whether we like it or not. Are you against the war on terror? Well, tough. You still got to pay for it. Are you against abortion? Tough. You still got to pay for it. Are you against the health care bill? Tough. You still got to pay for it. If you live in one of the Bible Belt states, are you against having the Ten Commandments at a courthouse? Well, tough. You got to pay for it. You got to pay for it no matter what. You don't get to choose whether you pay for what your government is doing. You have to, or you go to jail. They throw you in a cage. Now remember, the job of a police officer is not to interpret the law. His job is to enforce the law. His job is not to help you, not to protect you, not to serve you. His job is law enforcement, period. You need to remember that. If a policeman pulls you over for having tinted windows and he writes you a ticket, he really is interpreting the law because he's doing it by sight. But his job mandates that he writes a ticket, whether it's just or not. You know, that's not his job to determine whether what he's doing is just. On top of that, you're expected to pay the fine on the ticket that he's just issued you, or, you know, you get locked in a cage, like I said. Or you, and you're also expected to pay for his salary for the privilege to get protected, in quotes. You know, whom is he protecting by writing, tinted windows tickets? It's absurd. And this is just in a world where the police are not brutal and or incompetent. And, you know, not all of them are, certainly. But there are police officers that are incompetent and are brutal and treat people in a manner that doesn't suit, you know, a way that you should treat other human beings. And again, I harp on the fact that the job of the policeman is to enforce the law. I mean, what if the law, there's a law in the state of California that bans women from driving while wearing housecoats. There's a law in Texas that makes it illegal to take more than 3 sips of beer at a time while standing. I mean, you may laugh at these things and, haha, it's a big joke. But you paid for the legislators to write these laws. You pay for the policemen to enforce these laws if they decide to. I mean, happily, in most cases, they won't. But, there's always a chance that you're doing something the government doesn't like, and they'll enforce the dumb laws just to get you for something, just because they don't like you. Look at Al Capone. That's touted as a great success. Because they got him for tax evasion. Well, that's just because they couldn't get him for anything else. So they just threw whatever they could at the wall and see what stuck. To me, that's not a success. That's a failure of the system. A good book was written. It's by the author's name is Harvey Silverglate, and he's a lawyer. The book is called 3 Felonies a Day. And in it, he discusses how all of us commit 3 federal crimes every day without even knowing it. And I put crimes in quotes because a crime used to mean an action that you take that harms another person. But now it's come to mean disobedience to the powers that be. And I think we need to get back to the original definition of a crime. But anyway, 3 felonies a day, it's a very chilling look at our current state of affairs. In conclusion, the next time someone's behavior annoys you, just remember that if you live in a society of more than one person, you will be offended and inconvenienced from time to time. It's inevitable. That doesn't mean you have to accept it or like it, of course, but the correct action is not protesting the government to make a law banning whatever you don't like. The correct action is to lead by example and try to convince others to behave better by showing them your good example. Be a little creative and try to think of a way to change people's minds without using the brute force and incompetence of the state. The "there ought to be a law" mentality is just lazy and thoughtless. Thanks for listening.